Dean Legge Show for the week of Georgia's game with Tennessee. Quick fact, Georgia's actually never won the SEC East without first beating Tennessee. 2012, they beat the Vols in a shootout in Athens. 2011, they beat the Vols up in Knoxville for Mark Richt's 100th win in his career. 2005, they beat the Vols in Knoxville, a top 10 ranked Tennessee team. 2003, they blew Tennessee out thanks to Sean Jones' play near the end of the first, or at the end of the first half, with the Redcoats going crazy on the sideline. 2002, they beat Tennessee, a kind of an overmatched Tennessee team in Athens with a block a block punt, as well as a block punt that resulted in a safety. Should have been a touchdown. Resulted in a safety and a blocked field goal by Boss Bailey. So they've never done it without beating Tennessee. They've done it without beating Florida. They did that in 2 and 3 and 5. They've done that without beating South Carolina in 11 and 12. Obviously, they've never done it without beating Kentucky and Vanderbilt as well. But Tennessee seems to be the team that if you're Georgia, you need to beat them. Tennessee has upset Georgia before in Athens with such a wide spread. That game right now is at 17 or 17.5, depending on where you look. But Georgia's a very big favorite at home. Of course, Tennessee, the difference in the past is in, when Georgia lost to Tennessee in 2004, the Vols were ranked, and Georgia was coming off a huge emotional win, a blowout win over Nick Saban and LSU, 45-19 or whatever it was at the time. And the next week, Tennessee came in there and got them. Tennessee won the division in 2004. In 2006, Tennessee defeated. It's really easy. The years that Georgia's beaten Tennessee through Mark Richt's era: 2001, 2, 3, 5. 8, 10, 11, 12, and 13. About half those times, Georgia's won the division. The times they have not beaten them, which would be 4, obviously Tennessee won in Atlanta. 6, Tennessee, won in Athens. 6, Tennessee came back way down and won in Athens. 7, Tennessee blew Georgia out in Knoxville. Probably one of the worst losses of the Mark Richt era. 9, Tennessee blew Georgia out in Knoxville. That was actually probably one of the worst losses in the Mark Richt era. So in those games, Georgia's only really been favored. I'd have to go back and look, but they definitely were favored in 2004. 2009, I'm fairly certain Georgia was not the favorite in that game. Yeah, Georgia was a slight underdog to Tennessee, and in 2007 they were a slight favorite. Slight. 2004 was the crazy game when they were a 12-point favorite and lost the game 19-14. Leonard Pope ran the wrong route. But Tennessee was a different beast back then. The Vols are limping into this game at receiver, just like Georgia. This is probably the last weekend we're going to see Justin Scott Wesley out. Probably looking like the same thing for Malcolm Mitchell and Jonathan Rump, who has yet to really do much of anything of note at Georgia. He will probably be back against Vanderbilt next week. So this really is a big game for both teams. Obviously, Georgia's already lost a game and can barely survive another loss. But again, they have never won the East without beating Tennessee first, which really tells you all you need to know as far as the particulars of this game. Of course, the Vols haven't won this division since 2007. So, and from 2001 until 2008, this was really a division that was dominated by Georgia and Tennessee, with the Vols winning it in 1, Georgia in 2 and 3, Tennessee in 4, Georgia in 5. The Gators won it in 6 and 8. But 6, 8, and 9, but Tennessee won it in 07, Georgia won it in 11 and 12. So since Mark Richt has been here, the number one preventer of Georgia has actually been Tennessee, of all people. Okay, so we got some questions, and we're going to take it from there. Swanee Dog 03 says, do you anticipate getting Joystick, who I think is Isaiah McKenzie, even more involved for Georgia's upcoming SEC slate after his strong performance? Well, it's hard to know. I mean, you're going to have some guys coming back who are joysticks themselves, certainly Malcolm Mitchell. And we'll see what Malcolm can do. They'll probably work him in over time. I think this is a really good time to get those guys back. I'm sure they would have liked to have had them in Columbia, but that was out of the question, it looks like, with Justin Scott Wesley, who is quite obviously, even though no one can seem to report it, quite obviously serving a suspension. Malcolm Mitchell, I don't think is. I think he's legitimately hurt. So I don't know how that affects Isaiah McKenzie. It probably means for Isaiah that he has fewer snaps. But look, they looked okay in that Wild Dog. I don't know why you would really want to run that. If you want to run the football, you give it to number 3, 27, or 1 coming out of the backfield and just see what they have to do. Swanee Dog 03 continues. Most of us, including myself, thought Georgia would pressure the quarterbacks better against the Cox with Tennessee's inexperienced offensive line. Do you foresee Georgia putting what pressure on Worley most of the night? Well, Leonard Floyd seems to think so. Let me look at the statistics here. Georgia's 5th in the conference with 8 sacks this season. The teams at the top are the teams that are scoring a lot. Texas A&M has 17. So the bulk of that is A&M getting out in front. And then you know, the other team having to pass. So then you have the ability to have sacks. So it's Peyton Manning at the Colts with Dwight for anything. Tennessee's only allowed 9 sacks this season. They're, that doesn't sound like that much, but that's actually worse than the SEC. They're allowing 3 sacks a game. And the way I look at sacks is this. 1 sack equals the end of a drive, and you only get so many times to possess the ball. Usually, I mean, it depends, but 12 to 15 possessions. I mean, that's about 3 a quarter. Let's just call it that. 15 would be a lot, but that happens sometimes. And let's just call it 12 drives a game. That's 6 a half, 3 a quarter. A sack ends a drive. If you're allowing 6 sacks a game, you're basically taking 3 possessions. If you're allowing 3 sacks a game, you're basically taking, for me, 8% a time, because 1/12 is 8%. So you're taking about a quarter of your drives and just throwing them down the toilet. That's not going to work if you're Tennessee, and I think that's sort of the issue. Now, Georgia has the guys, and part of why the Vols are having so much trouble defending is because they're inexperienced on the line. I mean, we saw Jawan James and Tiny Richardson play there for 4 straight years, basically starting all of that time. Those guys are gone, and the learning curve has begun. But yeah, I mean, Tennessee's played 3 games. They've given up 9 sacks for 59 yards. Georgia's played 3 games. They've sacked 8 times for 60 yards. Seems to me like, Georgia's a little shy of 3 a game. Georgia can get 3 sacks in this game, they'll probably win. And I think that's important. Leonard Floyd seems to think that Georgia can get pressure. We'll see. Payne Hall asks, so Hudson threw for plus or minus 300 yards in each of the 2 games he started after Aaron Murray's injury. He didn't have Justin Scott Wesley and Malcolm in those games either. He did throw some nice 25 to 30 yard strikes to somebody in those games. Now I'm going to mention, why can't he do that now? It's not that he can't, he just hasn't been asked to, I think, is part of it. And I think there is a learning curve for Georgia too, and Mike Boba and Mark Richt and Georgia fans in general. If Georgia wins that South Carolina game, which they should have won, they definitely goofed that up. If you want to give congratulations to South Carolina, that's fine. They earned it. But that loss had nothing to do with Hudson. I think that Georgia has decided they're going to run the ball 60% of the time, and when they pass in those 40%, it doesn't involve long strikes down the field. Now, in my view, that's because they do not have a deep threat guy. And there's nothing wrong with Chris Conley. There's nothing wrong with Michael Bennett. But those are not deep threat guys the way that Justin can be, the way Tavares King was, or Marlon Brown or whoever. That's who Chris and particularly Michael Bennett made their money because those guys were making the big runs down the field, and those guys were working underneath. Well, if you put Justin in the game, and he can get down the field, because there's not many guys faster than Justin. If he can get down the field, it could just open up. I mean, Georgia's scoring 49 points a game right now, and it's hard to say they'd have more production from the offense, but perhaps they'll be more diverse. Right now, they're 12th in the conference at 167 yards a game. Not great passing the ball, but they're number 2 in rushing offense. Excuse me, number 3. Number 2 in rushing offense at 304 yards a game. I mean, that's Arkansas is doing nothing but running the ball. The only other team that's close to 300 yards a game is Mississippi State. Remember when Auburn was supposed to be lethal on the ground? That looks like it's Georgia right now. So I wouldn't get too worked up about Hudson. I'd let, the thing is they need to get through these next 4 games with wins. It doesn't matter how they do it. I think if Clemson's defense, which is pretty good, it seems to me, if they can't stop Georgia, there's not going to be a lot of teams in this conference that are going to stop Georgia, because that's about all Clemson has. And Clemson ran out of steam just the way they did against Florida State. That defense was out there for too long against the Noles, out there for too long against Georgia. And that's what happened. That's why they lost the game. I mean, they weren't in the same class really as Georgia in that fourth quarter, but that was because they had been pushed on the whole time by the run game. I mean, Georgia's got arguably 3 of the best running backs in the SEC that are playing for them right now. So I would continue to run it. I would not get too worked up about trying to force the ball. I mean, because that's what it would be forcing the ball with Hudson, because you don't have to do that right now. I mean, Todd's averaging 134 yards a game. Obviously, by the run, I believe Sony and Nick are both 1 and 2 or somewhere at the top 5. I don't have it right off the top of my head here. So I don't know. I think the other thing I did take a hard look at the statistics this weekend for this weekend's game, and Tennessee's going to have problems scoring. I mean, Georgia's defense is it's not the excellence that Georgia wants, the fans, but it's top 25 basically in every category nationally. So that's not that bad. I mean, scoring, run, etc. The passing's a little bit limited. Tennessee is number 13 in the SEC in rushing. They're number 10 in passing. They're 13th in total offense and 13th in scoring. That's a real problem. That's not good. They're one of only 2 teams in the conference that's not scoring more than 30 points a game. The entire SEC, except Vanderbilt and Kentucky and Tennessee, are scoring 36 points a game. Now tell me this game's about defense, and I'll call you a liar, because it's not. The game has changed. Scoring defense, yes, there are some teams, Mississippi, A&M, and Alabama, that are all allowing 14 points or fewer a game. But Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, Florida, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt, basically the East, they're all allowing 20 points or more a game. So this league has changed. It's become who can score the most points. And it used to be a race to 24. Now it's a race to 35. HP Dog, any guess or thoughts on who Mark Richt was referring to when he said Georgia has several silent commitments on his radio call? I don't like those guessing games. I don't know. I missed that. I couldn't even. I wouldn't even really know where to start with that, because you're talking about DeAndre Walker's out there, Rashad Roundtree's out there. The 2 kids at GAC would actually, now that I think about it, be my guess if that's what he's talking about. But he could be talking about those 2 guys. I mean, Rico McGraw has suddenly, allegedly, if you were listening to the Pulse earlier on Dog Post, He's become more interested in Georgia. He was committed to the Bulldogs. Now he's committed to Alabama. There's a kid from Alabama who's committed to the Tide that's visiting this weekend. I don't want to play those guessing games because Mark Richt doesn't tell me. It would make my life a lot easier. And I would stay quiet if he would just tell me who's committed to Georgia. It would make my life easier for magazine planning, etc. But he's yet to do that. I'm available. I'm available. You can let me know. HP Dog also says, I thought I saw Ray Drew starting last week. Was that correct? Who do you feel like the best who do you feel like the best four defensive linemen are right now? Well, right now Toby Johnson is for sure. You're saying four. Georgia was a 3-4 still. I would probably say Sterling, Toby. I guess Ray. I don't know if he started last week or not, but I don't know if that matters because they're going to play about 8 guys. It feels like 7 to 8 guys each week. They're running them in and out. Same thing in the secondary. Ray was supposed to be a third-string defensive lineman. I never really bought that. I never bought that JJ was a starting member of the secondary either. And as it turns out, both those things have been true. I don't know who the best four are, but right this second, Toby Johnson's giving them their best performance up to date. HP continues. I was very impressed with Tim Kimbrough and Lorenzo Carter last week, or Reggie Carter at middle linebacker. They look very quick and athletic. Those two guys are pretty good now. Reggie Carter, nobody remembers him from recruiting, probably because he tore his ACL and didn't hardly play at the latter stages of his high school career. But he's a very good linebacker. Tim Kimbrough looks like he's shot out of a cannon at times. Georgia's very fortunate to get him. They're okay at middle linebacker. They don't have middle linebacker issues for this year. They're linebackers for the outside. It looks like I would imagine Leonard Floyd will leave Jordan. I don't know, but Lorenzo Carter comes in right there. You still have Davin Bellamy to develop. He's played one game. They've been pretty happy with him so far. And then you've got other guys in there, but it's obvious Lorenzo Carter is going to be a big deal in the future. At least it looks like that way to me. So to answer your question, the middle linebackers, I agree with you. They do look good, and but those are the backups, and those guys have been playing. Big thing is, the other thing I wrote about earlier this week is special teams at Georgia are markedly better. Georgia is allowing negative yards on punt returns, which is pretty good. Now they were always decent at the punt game, but right now they are allowing, I think, negative 1.5 yards a return. They're first of all, people aren't even returning on them, and when they do, they have been disasters. So the punt game has been, Georgia's done pretty well in the punt game, and listen, statistics I guess are for losers, but you don't want to be at the bottom of these statistics. And a couple of teams Georgia has in there with them in the East, they are at the bottom. South Carolina's at the bottom of a lot of these. They're on the bottom of run defense. They're at the bottom. They're at or near the bottom of. Tennessee. South Carolina is at 11 in rushing offense, 10 in total offense, and 10 in scoring. That'll catch up with you. Tennessee's at 13, 10, 13, and 13. Vandy's at 14, 13, 14, and 14 on offense alone. South Carolina, their issue is they're in last place or next to last in the major four statistical categories for defense. That's what Spurrier's pissed off about. Tennessee's defense is about average in the conference. They're doing okay. They're allowing a little bit more points than you would imagine for their statistical performance. But the Gators are near the bottom in everything but run defense. They may match up well with Georgia, but they're probably not going to be able to score with Georgia. The Cats can't defend the run. South Carolina is 14th against the run. Vandy's 11th against the run, 14th in scoring. Missouri is 10th all the way across the board. I still think I think Georgia's still going to win the East. South Carolina, they're going to need South Carolina to lose, but you know, they're not. South Carolina's not going to be able to keep up the way they're playing. They're not going to be able to keep that up. They're going. What I'm saying is they'll lose, so they better watch it. UGA Dog Forever asks, "What's the biggest concern Georgia should have coming into this weekend?" Well, I think the big thing, if it were me, would be injuries. Number one, because they had such a difficult time with that last year at Tennessee. The Vols do a pretty good job against passing defense. They're the fourth in the conference. So the big thing would be to be yourself, run the ball, see where that's going to get you. It seems to me like Georgia and Mike Bobo understand that there's no reason to be anything other than what you are. And by the way, on that, the first and goal from the 4, I thought that was what Georgia was too. I mean, people are saying, "Why didn't you run it? Why didn't you run it?" Not running it wasn't that big of a deal. It was the grounding that was the problem, because that's very Georgia. That's that little play to the fullback in the flats. I think you'll recall that. I mean, they run that play a lot, and they've scored a lot of touchdowns that way. They did that against, I remember specifically Brandon Sutherland against Florida in 2007. I mean, that's Mike. I mean, that's what he's been doing for a long time. The issue wasn't that they weren't being themselves. The issue was that they got called for intentional grounding. It was a tough call. It wasn't as bad as that holding call. Now, that was rough. But Georgia's got to be themselves. I don't know if there's tons. I mean, I think you got to take Tennessee seriously. And I think that kids are taking them seriously. But frankly, I think people like me, I wondered at first why are the Vols a 17-point dog? And then you kind of look around a little bit and you understand why. Georgia scored no fewer than 45 points at Sanford Stadium in like every game from the 2013 season until today. Actually, let me just go back just quick here while I've got that on my mind, because it's some crazy statistic that I was looking up this past season with how much that they have scored at home lately. I mean, the only game that they haven't scored 45 points, they scored, just going backwards, they've scored 66 against Troy, 45 against Clemson. In 2013, they scored 59 against Kentucky, 45 against App State. They scored 26 and lost to Missouri. They scored 44 against LSU, 45 against North Texas, 41 against Carolina. These are all games in Sanford. In 2012, they scored 42 against Tech, 45 against Southern, 37 against Ole Miss, 51 against Tennessee, 48 against Vandy, 56 against Florida Atlantic, and 45 against Buffalo. That's a lot of points on the scoreboard. That's a lot of points on the scoreboard. There's no reason for me to think that these guys are going to have trouble scoring this week against Tennessee. As improved as Tennessee has, it doesn't seem to matter who Georgia is playing at home. It doesn't seem to matter who the quarterback and the running backs are, unless the running backs are J.J. Green and Brendan Sutherland and Brendan Douglas. So they have scored a ton of points, and Tennessee's going to have to score points too. Rick Tite says, Dean, do you still hold to what you said a couple weeks ago, that if South Carolina can't be handled, then there needs to be a major adjustment in the season's goals? What adjustments do you need to believe to be made? Well, I think that game was a pretty bad loss now. I mean, that definitely, that could cost them down the road in terms of the national championship. What I mean by that is, the South Carolina they were as bad as I thought they were, and Georgia lost. So I think that, the adjustments, I guess they haven't had to be made yet, but they've left themselves no margin for error. That they lost the way they did, I think a lot of people are going to excuse that if they are 11-1 or 12-1 and they've won the conference. I mean, I think if they win the SEC with 1 or 2 losses, they're going to get to the playoff anyway. But I think that I think it did make some people change their uh, goals. I mean, I think people immediately thought that they were done, and I think that when I got back from Columbia, I did think that they had lost their shot at the national championship, and they may have, but they haven't lost their shot at the East, and the East is the only pathway to get to where you got to go. I mean, that's just all there is to it. If you don't win the East, you're not going to win the national championship. I mean, you would need a minor miracle. I mean, at this stage, if Georgia didn't win the East, they would, and to get to the playoff, they would have to run the table, which means South Carolina, with games at Auburn and Florida, is going to and Clemson is going to have to run the table. That's just not likely. So you got to win the East. That's one of the worst losses I think we're going to see as this season goes on. That's going to be one of the worst losses in the Mark Richt era because Georgia's that much better than South Carolina. I mean, 7-point favorite on the road, that's a big number. And anyhow, maybe I was being a little bit dramatic at the time, but I don't think what I saw heading into that game or coming out of that game has changed. South Carolina is not that great. Now, they're not going to just fall on their face and go 6-6. But that's just a game Georgia should have never lost, period. I mean, did you watch them play Vanderbilt? South Carolina play Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt was bad. And they almost lost. I mean, they played terrible in that game. Obviously got blown out on their home field. They basically had 2 good performances and 2 flat performances. And the one good performance was exactly the one that South Carolina needed. But this shows about Georgia, and I think that considering how bad the East is, comparatively speaking, to the West, Georgia has plenty. I mean, Georgia's still probably the best team in the East, but, they're trailing South Carolina. Got to get out of this habit. But they just can't help themselves, I guess. They just cannot help themselves. Okay, Dean Legge Show for the week of Georgia's game with Tennessee.